While there is some debate as to what caused the Titanic to sink to the bottom of the ocean, most historians would agree that it was probably the iceberg that caused most of the problems by hitting the ship. After this contact, the Titanic took around 3 hours to sink, which begs the obvious question: would the Titanic have sank if Roy Keane was captain? Well, it may seem like Roy Keane being captain wouldn't be able to stop the Titanic from sinking. However, the evidence is compelling. Roy Keane was captain of Manchester United for 8 years and has been described as one of the best captains in Premier League history. Given his extensive experience as a leader, some historians have suggested that the Titanic may have successfully completed its journey to New York if he was in charge of the ship. One of the main errors that caused the Titanic to sink was that the ship was going at high speeds through an area of the Atlantic that had reported to contain a large number of icebergs. However, it's more than reasonable to suggest that if Roy Keane was captain, he would have understood the importance of focusing on the journey rather than the destination. Having won 7 Premier League titles with Manchester United, Roy Keane would recognise that it's a marathon rather than a sprint. Based on this, it's likely that Roy Keane would have ordered the Titanic to reduce its speed a bit, which would have given the ship more time to avoid any potential icebergs. Furthermore, experts of the Titanic have frequently noted that despite the captain's vast experience in the Navy, he had virtually no experience in dealing with emergencies. But the same can't be said for Roy Keane, who was the first to take responsibility and put things right when things went against Man United. For example, in the second leg of the 1999 Champions League semi-final, Man United conceded 2 early goals to Juventus and looked set to be eliminated from the competition. But Roy Keane stepped up as captain and produced one of the greatest individual performances of all time, with a goal and an assist against the toughest opponent in Europe. Man United won the game 3-2 and went on to win the Champions League, thanks to the captaincy of Roy Keane, which immediately caused historians to question whether or not he may have been able to change the fate of the Titanic. Even if the Titanic had collided with an iceberg while Roy Keane was captain, it's safe to assume that he would have done an excellent job of dealing with this situation. Having played over 400 games in the top flight of English football, he would have demanded the highest standards from his crew and would have covered an incredible amount of ground on the ship to keep everything running smoothly. A common theme of mistakes in the build-up to the Titanic's sinking was a lack of communication. However, the same can't be said for Manchester United under the captaincy of Roy Keane, who would shout at and be direct with his teammates to prevent any mistakes from happening. So in conclusion, the evidence is hard to refute. When you take into account Roy Keane's leadership qualities and years of experience in football, it is more than reasonable to suggest that if Roy Keane was captain, it would have been highly likely that the Titanic would not have sunk and would have instead made it to its destination in New York.